This is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft chocolate, craft beer, and other artisan drinks. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional drinks writer, an advanced cicerone, the author of Pairing Beer and Chocolate, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or on annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Happy spring, everyone. This is our first episode since the spring equinox. Hopefully you are all ready for the changing seasons. Ohio currently is in the middle of its annual 2-month-long just confusion pendulum between winter and summer, where one day it can be 75 degrees and sunny, and then the next day it snows, and then it's 70 and sunny, and then the next day it's 40 and rainy, and it's windy all the time. And this is just the Midwest in spring, and you either love it or you hate it. Hopefully you are enjoying spring wherever you are. In honor of the beginning of spring, today's episode, we are talking with a chocolate maker from a country whose tourism tagline is Land of Eternal Spring. We're going to be talking with Diego's Chocolate, who makes amazing chocolate in Guatemala. It has been a lot of years since I was in Guatemala, but one thing I remember is just the gorgeous weather, and pretty much year-round. They have just amazing, 75-degree sunny weather. It's just a gorgeous country to visit. We're going to be talking with a chocolate maker from this beautiful country. Diego Hernandez has been making chocolate near Lake Atitlan in Guatemala since 1990, which is just ancient by craft chocolate standards. We're going to be talking with Nico Silverman, who goes by Nico. Nico is the U.S. representative for Diego's Chocolate. So we're going to be talking with Nico all about the company, the story behind them, Diego's story, what makes their chocolate unique, and then especially diving in on pairing their chocolate with beer and with cider, which is a new one for us here at Bean to Barstool. If you listen through to the end of the episode, I will give you a coupon code for Diego's website, good for 20% off everything in their shop. This code is exclusive to Bean to Barstool listeners, so make sure you listen to the end to get that code and get a nice little discount on some of their really great chocolate that you're going to want to try after you listen to this conversation. Real quick shout out before we get started. We have a new pro sponsor on Patreon. Cocoa Supply is now a sponsor of Final Gravity and Bean to Barstool. If you've been listening to the show for a while, that name is familiar to you. Cocoa Supply is a great company out of Ecuador. We have had their CEO, Lila Carvajal-Urker, on the podcast a couple times at least, maybe 2 or 3 times, and have a couple blog posts about them as well. If you go on to beantobarstool.com and go to the search, just type in Cocoa Supply and you can see everything we've done with them. They import cacao, both cacao nibs and also pulp, so cacao fruit pulp in a couple different forms, and are working with a ton of craft breweries around the country to supply those ingredients to them to make some really fascinating chocolate and cacao beers. So you can find out more about them on the Bean to Barstool website by searching their name. I'll also provide a link to their website in the show notes for this episode. Big thanks to Cocoa Supply for sponsoring what we're doing. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor or advertiser, either on Bean to Barstool or Final Gravity, our quarterly print beer zine, you can go to beantobarstool.com/advertising to find out more about those opportunities. Now, with no further delay, here is my conversation with Nico at Diego's Chocolate. Nico, thank you so much for talking with me today. At the outset, I'd love to hear more about the story behind Diego's Chocolate. It looks like there's a really rich heritage there. Tell us the backstory of how Diego's got started.
Sure thing. And first of all, thanks for having me, David. I'm a huge fan of the show, and it's a real honor to be here today. Diego Hernandez is a Tz'utujil Mayan chocolate maker. He lives in Guatemala, and he started making his chocolates around 1990. He lives in a part of Guatemala called Lake Atitlan that is heavily visited by tourists, and he wanted to make a chocolate product that could sustain a business and feed his family. So again, that was 1990. Fast forward to the year 2012, and I was working at Etsy.com in their corporate offices in Brooklyn. While on some travel that I was doing at the time in Guatemala to improve my Spanish, I met some artisans who were making amazing handmade products, including Diego, who makes the chocolate. And I took the stories and kind of case studies of these artisans back to Etsy and pitched a project to the company about making Etsy as a platform more accessible to artisans in developing countries. Long story short, the Etsy project internally did not work out. They decided to go in another direction, which I totally understood. But I was really inspired by these makers, producers that I had met at Lake Atitlan, and so I formed a small LLC to import and distribute Diego's chocolate in the USA.
That's awesome. Did you have any background with chocolate or any real knowledge of chocolate at the time?
None whatsoever, David. I had no knowledge of chocolate whatsoever, and I always try to put myself in that mindset when I'm working with my audiences and customers, because I too was once even unaware of the fact that cacao grows on trees and that and such and such.
Yeah, I think that's a familiar story. Very few people, except for the farmers growing cacao, started out with any understanding of what this was about. We all just kind of stumbled into it somehow and then got hooked.
That is the best way to say it, and I can include myself amongst those who stumbled into it. It was more of a like connecting artisans with customers directly via e-commerce and digital marketing, and turned into a 10+ year deep dive into chocolate.
So your founder, he's been at this now almost half a century. I mean, he's been what, 35, 40 years,
30,
you said?
35 years. It'll be just last month. We marked the date in February of 1990. So yeah, 35 years. Yeah.
And so he still as passionate about making chocolate as he was at the beginning?
Absolutely. The man is indefatigable. He does not stop. He works very, very long hours and loves what he does. I mean, he still roasts all of our cacao by hand, about 2-3 pounds at a time, over a wood fire.
Wow. All of your cacao is roasted over a wood fire.
Indeed, indeed, it is.
Is this like tree to bar? Does he grow his own cacao, or is he sourcing from other farms in the area?
Not tree to bar, because where Diego lives at Lake Atitlan is very high elevation. It's about a mile up above sea level. They did manage to grow one cacao tree there that has some pods on it. And if you go to our shop, which by the way, listeners, you can visit us in San Juan La Laguna and San Pedro La Laguna, Sololá, Guatemala. And if you visit our San Pedro shop, you'll see our one cacao tree that does get some pods. But no, cacao cannot grow really in any commercially viable quantity at altitudes that high. But in the lower altitudes of Guatemala, it does grow.
Awesome. So he
And
has
we get it from two farms within Guatemala.
Tell us a little bit more about the visitor experience. I saw that you've got the two locations. What can people expect if they were able to make a trip?
Well, first and foremost, the main attraction besides the chocolate products themselves, which I should mention that the variety of flavors that you will encounter at our shops in Guatemala will be much wider than the flavor variety that we have available here in the States. We usually have 8 or so varieties here, and down there could be upwards of 15 to 20 at a time. They have all different inclusions. These are all different flavor inclusions. But the main attraction at our locations are a little like hands-on demonstration where our staff will show you roasted cacao beans, allow you to try your hand at peeling, winnowing the shell yourself. And then we also have the traditional volcanic stone metates, which are the grinding tools that the Mayan ancestors of Diego and his chocolate makers would have used to grind cacao, as well as corn and other foodstuffs. And visitors can get down on their knees and try the metate, grind some cacao themselves, take some shaved up panela, which is the sugar that we use, and mix that in with the cacao on the metate and get a sense of the two ingredient, kind of chocolate along its way before it's finished. And the shops are really beautiful. They're adorned with, lots of bright colors to reflect the Mayan aesthetic. And we have lots of accessory products that go with the chocolates. There are cacao butter beauty products and cacao infused beers, I believe, from some other, not that we make, we bring in some products from other, artisans in the area down there. But it's a whole experience.
So over the course of 35 years, what has changed in what Diego offers, and what did he start out making in 1990 versus the wide range of products you're talking about now?
The basic format of his product has not changed, which is kind of cool. I'll start by saying that if folks are not familiar with Diego's chocolate, they come in a tube or roll shape instead of the traditional bar. They're cylindrical. People often call them chocolate cigars, although I joke that you can light them, but they don't burn too well. So we have these little tube-shaped chocolates that are about 2 ounces each. They have brightly colored packaging on the outside. Each color represents a different flavor inclusion mixed in. So while that basic shape and format, including our hand-colored labels, our staff actually colors a section of the labels of each chocolate. That aspect has remained consistent since the early 90s. What has changed are the number of inclusions that Diego has offered. I think at the beginning there was maybe 4 or 5. As I mentioned, there's over 20 now, including one with rum that you can get when you're down there. We haven't started bringing that in yet, but it's delicious. I've had it with Zacapa rum is the brand. So more inclusions. And the other change that I've made on behalf of kind of the US customer base, along with Diego, is to change our cacao sourcing, because Diego traditionally uses lavado or washed cacao, which is not really fermented or barely fermented. This is what people in Central America and Southern Mexico traditionally would use, and and it has a very different taste, and it's the taste that they are accustomed to, but it's not the taste, right, that fine chocolate lovers here in North America and elsewhere are used to. So in the last couple of years, we were able to shift just for the U.S. products to fermented cacao.
Can you describe a little of what that sensory difference would be if somebody could go down and try the cacao lavado?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people say that the lavado cacao has a coffee aftertaste, a roasted coffee bean aftertaste that some people like. Up here in the States, I've found. Others find unpleasant. The lavado washed cacao also has just a bit more astringency to it. I think the fermentation process cuts that down a lot, and that's part of how we get more of the fine aromas in the finished product of a chocolate made with a properly fermented cacao. So you've got these extra coffee notes, you've got extra astringency, and it's a little bit harder to taste the underlying flavors and aromas that the cacao beans themselves have.
Okay. In the roll format that you talked about, these chocolate cigars, as people refer to them, Is the texture what people are expecting of typical chocolate, or what is the texture like, and how would you explain the reason for that to somebody who wasn't familiar with it?
It's a really good question because people are very surprised by the texture. It's not what they're used to because besides being in a roll shape, our chocolate is untempered. So I'm imagining that most of your listeners know what tempering is with chocolate, so I won't get into it. But tempering is a part of the chocolate making process that is more or less a result of the Industrial Revolution, especially the machines that we use nowadays. Obviously, it could be done by hand on a marble slab, but even that was something that didn't exist until after contact between European and indigenous peoples. As such, tempering chocolate is not in the cacao or chocolate culture of Diego and his Tz'utujil Mayan people. So his chocolate rolls are soft. Instead of that hard snap that you're used to with a tempered chocolate bar, our rolls, on the other hand, have a consistency almost of Play-Doh or fudge. If you try one of our ones that has milk in it, especially the ones with the higher milk content, are especially pliable. Like I've even like had fun with kids making sculptures, little play sculptures out of our chocolates because like Play-Doh, it is moldable and malleable, and that texture to customers can be a little off-putting or surprising. I think is what it is at first. Most people are pleasantly surprised, but some people, just because I think of the expectation that they have of the hard texture, they are don't know what to make of it. So I always let people know, like when I'm handing them a sample at in-person events, it has a different texture. It's a soft chocolate, just to kind of prime their minds for that.
And is the melt similar once you have it in your mouth, or is that a different experience as well?
There's no added cocoa butter in our chocolates, so you're really getting the melts as you know of the cocoa butter content that the beans have themselves. Untempered chocolate melts at a slightly lower temperature than tempered chocolate, so it kind of I would say the melt is maybe a little bit faster. But I've had people tell me that it lingers just as long, if not longer, than tempered chocolate
Sure.
on the palate.
Interesting.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone. Gravel Road Brewing Company in downtown Middletown, Ohio, just south of Dayton, is brewing great beer and offering a full calendar of food trucks and fun events. Located in a former industrial building that's full of character, Gravel Road has a small, cozy bar space and a larger, family-friendly taproom area with a pool table and games. Head brewer Dan Loro is passionate about historical brewing traditions, so you'll often find styles like Munich Helles and Kentucky Common on tap. But yes, there's usually a hazy IPA too, if that's your preference. While you're there, you can say hello to Chicken Nugget, Gravel Road's resident brewery cat, who even has his own Instagram account. If you live in Cincinnati or the Miami Valley, or you're just passing through, head down to Gravel Road and check out this excellent brewery. And thanks to Gravel Road for sponsoring Final Gravity and Bean to Barstool. Let's talk about some of the inclusions that you offer, especially in your US lineup. Walk us through some of the bars that people can order on the website.
So starting with our kind of most classic inclusions, we have a chocolate that has cacao nibs mixed in it, so that's self-explanatory. There's a sea salt chocolate that is a crowd pleaser and very, very popular. And I'll proudly say that some years ago, I suggested to Diego that he make a sea salt chocolate, and to this day, it's a big seller down there in Guatemala as well. Because I saw other people up here doing it, and it seemed to make sense. We have a coconut chocolate, dried shredded coconut. I should mention that all of our inclusion ingredients, as well as the cacao, obviously, and our sugar, comes from within Guatemala. That's one of the cool things about making chocolate at origin, is you have access to all the ingredients locally. Are getting into our more specialty inclusions. I really love our Cobanero chile. It has ground dried and smoked chili pepper that comes from a region of Guatemala called Coban. It's the same region, in fact, where our cacao comes from. And it's a very traditional pepper that's been grown by the Tz'utujil Mayan people up there for a long, long time. They've been mixing it with chocolate for, I'm sure, many, many years. And it has a really nice, smoky, earthy flavor that obviously goes well with chocolate. And Diego is really a master at his adding of the inclusions. I like to say he always adds just enough without stepping on the cacao flavor, without overpowering it. And the Cobanero Chile is a really great example of that, because you almost don't even get the heat at first when you taste it. It's like chocolate at the front, and then the warming and heat sensation is really at the finish, at the end. Sometimes people, I see their eyes light up as they walk away from the table, because that's where they tried the chocolate, because it took them 30 seconds or so to feel the heat. So that one's complex. I like it for that. I would also point out our cardamom. We have a 75% cacao chocolate with whole cardamom pods, which gives you a little crunch every so often and a big bright burst of that floral bouquet of notes. And interesting fact, although cardamom is not, of the native cuisine in Central America, Guatemala is the number one producer, has become the number one producer of cardamom grower in the world.
I did not know that. Is it
right?
endemic? I mean, it's not.
No,
Yeah.
it was brought there for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it's from India, Sri Lanka, that Southeast Asia originally, but it's probably been in Guatemala for a while, and I guess again in that same region, Coban, which is kind of like the breadbasket of the country. They grow a lot of cardamom, and I believe it's like the second or third highest value crop. It's like up there with saffron and vanilla in terms of its weight. So the point is that we have access to really high quality and fairly priced, because we could buy it directly, cardamom,
That is
and
really cool.
it makes for an awesome chocolate.
Yeah, before you said that, when you said everything grew in Guatemala, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know cardamom grew in Guatemala. Now, didn't know now that it's such a major crop. That's fascinating.
I never did either before this. It's a really interesting bit of trivia.
Let's talk about your base chocolate itself. You mentioned that Diego buys from two farms in the Caban region. Does that all just get blended together into a base chocolate? Do you do, like estate chocolate? How does that work?
Right now, it's kind of on a batch basis. So our last batch, the beans were from Funda La Chua, and our next batch, the rolls will be from cacao from the second farm, which is Grupo Campura, and our 100% cacao blocks, which people use for cacao tea and other such uses, will be from La Chua, the previously named one. So, but no, we haven't started. We don't have the quite labeling or inventory capacity to separate between the two in a way that you could really know. You could buy beans, chocolate made with beans from one or the other. However, that is something that we're looking to do. I make it known on the website. I change it when the beans change. But we don't mix them. We don't mix them yet. I do like people to experience the slight difference in flavors
How
that are
would you
there.
characterize the flavor of those base chocolates?
The La Chua cacao, which has been used by other craft chocolate
Hmm.
makers in recent years, because Uncommon Cacao was exporting it from Guatemala. They no longer do, but luckily we still have access to it there. It's known for its citric acidity and really heavy tropical fruit notes. As and it's like it tastes like it's bioregion where it's from. That part of the country of Guatemala is one of the most biodiverse areas in the country, and this particular cacao project is part of a multi-year agroforestry endeavor. It's called like I'll translate it from Spanish. It's like the Inter-American Model Forest Project, where some nonprofits and government institutions are investing in maybe about a dozen countries, I think, throughout Latin America and the Caribbean to create new ways of growing crops that are sustainable and combat desertification and increase the livelihoods for the farmers and producers. So that's the Lechua, and Campura is really interesting because on that farm they're reforesting an old cattle ranch, again with an agroforestry model, private business, but very, very careful with what they do, both in terms of the environment and the way they take care of their workforce. That cacao has, again, really, really tropical fruity notes and just a very almost overpowering but pleasant chocolate, like deep chocolate cocoa flavor, if that makes sense. It is a really chocolatey bean, and it has a naturally high, a little bit higher cocoa butter content, it seems. So it makes our chocolate rolls extra creamy, which is always the effect that we're going for.
It's interesting the way you describe those two different origins. Those are pretty different flavor profiles you're talking about, going from very, very fruity tropical to a much more classic chocolatey base.
Yeah, it shows the wide variety of cacao genetics that exists within Guatemala, just within this region of Guatemala, because both these places are kind of in the northern Alta Verapaz state, but they got their cacao trees, their saplings, their cuttings from different sources, and I imagine that's what leads to the difference. Besides the slightly different soil and other practices.
Sure. Well, Nico, you and I got connected because you recently did some pairings with a couple of breweries in New York State, and I'd love to take a few minutes to talk about those. The ones that I had seen recently were with Wolf Hollow Brewing and Dancing Grain, which is a farm brewery. Why don't we start with Wolf Hollow? Tell me a little bit about how you got connected there and what that pairing was like.
Wolf Hollow is a brewery here so I live in Schenectady, New York, which is a part of the capital region, the capital being Albany, which is nearby. And we have a pretty decent little brewery scene up here. I think there's about 50 or so within an hour's drive. And one of my favorites that's nearby is Wolf Hollow. We started as customers there, and one day brought some of the chocolates to just kind of try out some pairings, having become fans of Bean to Barstool and having friends in the industry who are also doing chocolate and beer pairings. And we found a lot of good combinations. They were making this, what do they call it? The Camp Out Stout, that I believe was a Russian Imperial Stout, and it paired really well with our Cobanero Chile. And things kind of just rolled from there. We've actually had two pairings there over the last year. We did like a fall one outside and then a winter one inside. What I like about Wolf Hollow is that they can get pretty creative with their beers, and they have a really wide variety of different styles that they play with. And so there's always something new when I go back there to try out with our chocolates. Plus, they have just a wonderful environment. It's like kind of tucked away amidst these rolling hills. It's like in an actual hollow. They have their own trails and a little lake back there. I highly recommend it. And it's like being in like someone's amazing backyard who also brews delicious beer.
That's awesome. Yeah, that pairing you just described, the Russian Imperial Stout and the chili chocolate, sounds amazing. What were some other individual pairings that you were able to do for the pairing that you did?
Wolf Hollow made a fruited sour that was made with locally grown raspberries, and that paired really well with our basil chocolate. I neglected to mention our basil as one of our more interesting and much loved inclusions. As you can imagine, there were, that one brought me right to summer, even though it was cold time, and it was almost like walking through a raspberry field in summer. There was just a lot of brightness and like heavy, because this was a fruited ale that definitely relied heavily on the fruit itself. But raspberries, aren't too sweet, so it balanced really well with the basil chocolate.
Awesome. And I also saw that you're going to be doing a pairing at Dancing Grain Brewery. Tell us a little bit about that brewery and what you have planned for that pairing.
Yeah, what's really cool about Dancing Grain is that they are a true farm brewery. They grow most of the grains and other ingredients that they use to make their beer. So they obviously have a whole lot of control over the entire process, almost like a tree to bar chocolate maker, perhaps if Diego were growing his own cacao. So I really like that as a connection, because we're making chocolate in country, at least with farmers who live within the same borders, and then here they're keeping the grain and beer production local. So they at Dancing Grain make a IPA that has a little bit of orange juice added to it. And I know that IPAs can be a bit challenging with dark chocolates especially, but I always try to see if I can find something that works. And with this, they call it the Sunrise Squeeze IPA. I found that it paired really nicely with Diego's 75% coconut. And I should add that because there's naturally, you get kind of like a fruit cocktail thing going on there. And I should add that all of Diego's chocolate is made with a small amount of fresh squeezed orange juice.
Oh.
So it's what Diego uses to liquefy the panela, the sugar, before mixing it in with the cacao mass. So all of our chocolate's got a little bit of this orange undertone to it.
Real quick,
that
using that liquid doesn't create any issues with mixing in the cacao. I mean, you don't end up with like seizing or anything.
I think he literally cooks it over a wood fire. The juice and panela, which reduces the liquid content. So at Dancing Grain, they make what they call the Sunrise Squeeze IPA. And because all of Diego's chocolate has the orange juice in it, it was a natural one to try, and it gives you a really nice balance of the bitterness of the hops, and with our coconut inclusion, it adds a layer of sweetness that makes the whole thing come together. And then obviously there's this really strong orange flavor. So if one likes orange in beer, orange in chocolate, or both, that one will definitely be a winner. Another one I would point out from Dancing Grain that we're looking forward to is our cardamom chocolate with Dancing Grain's Golden Stout. Yeah, their Golden Stout was really a different one for me. It's not as full bodied as the ones I'm used to, but it had a really complex amount of flavor from the different grains that they use. I will admit I'm not as educated on beer making as I am on chocolate making, but this stout was like one of the most interesting and complex ones that I've had. And we decided to go crazy with that one and pair it with the cardamom, which is one of our most complex chocolates. And I'm going to do that one at the end of our pairing assortment to kind of just hopefully blow everyone's palates out of the water with this kind of grainy, floral, sweet combination. Yeah, that will be a good end to the night.
That's a really interesting one, because cardamom is both potentially sharp but also takes creaminess very well. And so depending on that balance of flavor, you can read it one way or the other very easily. And I think a golden stout is an interesting kind of base to support that and cushion some of the sharpness a little bit. Is there lactose in the stout?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone. You may have noticed things in the world aren't awesome right now, and social media kind of reflects that. I built a lot of the following for Bean to Barstool and just for my own writing career on Instagram, but I've been getting significantly lower returns in terms of engagement on Instagram, and well, some of their recent changes don't have me thrilled for the future. So, here are some ways to keep up with Bean to Barstool if Instagram and other social media platforms don't prove to be long-term viable solutions. If you do nothing else, sign up for the Bean to Barstool newsletter. You can do that by going to beantobarstool.com/newsletter-signup. That link is in the show notes. That is a weekly email newsletter that covers all the same things we cover here on the podcast. Speaking of, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Wherever you listen to Bean to Barstool, go there and subscribe to make sure you get notifications of new episodes. If you're a proud millennial like me and you still use an RSS feeder, you can also subscribe to our blog posts, which come out at least weekly. Also, if you are still on social media but don't love Meta right now, you can check me out over on Blue Sky. I'm on there under my personal account at David Nilsson Beer, but I do post all the Bean to Barstool content over there as well. Finally, if you want to get in touch with me directly, you can email beantobarstool@gmail.com. I am not leaving Instagram anytime soon, but these are great ways to make sure you can keep up with what I have going on. Stay safe and take care of each other.
Not in this one. I don't believe so. And that's why that lack of creaminess made me a bit nervous to try it, but it worked. I hope other folks agree with me. I always bring one or two other palates when I'm doing these things, so we get a bit of a consensus. But
Sure.
this one should be fun.
That sounds fun. I like that. Yeah. Now, a farm brewery, when people just hear that, typically we're talking about Belgian styles. New York State, of course, has some legal definitions around a farm brewery in order to encourage using New York agriculture. Does Dancing Grain brew kind of what we would think of as conventional farmhouse styles as well, like Belgian Saison and things like that? Or are they brewing, it sounds like from what you've described, these are more conventional American craft beer styles with, an IPA and golden stout and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. On my pairing menu, we're going to use their cherry sour, their wild ale. They have a porter. I don't remember seeing saisons on the menu.
A wild ale could easily fit in with that.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So it seems they are making some beers that do fit the definition you were describing.
Yeah, New York's an interesting state for that because of the way they have that legally defined. It doesn't have to necessarily mean it's brewing farmhouse beers or even on a farm if you're using New York agriculture for a percentage of what you're doing.
It's about the sourcing of the ingredients, yes, and I know just from visiting taprooms and such that there's even a special liquor license that's easier to get and I imagine less expensive, where if you're only selling such beers that are brewed, with locally made ingredients, you can get this other type of license.
Cool. I saw also that you set up at the New York Craft Brewers Guild conference. What was that like, interacting with the brewers coming by to try your chocolate?
That event is a lot of fun, David. This is something that we've done for 3 years straight now. And to be honest, we interact more with the attendees of the event who are craft beer lovers. But I always get there early to go around and taste as many of the amazing beers and talk to the brewers and representatives. I mean, it's a really interesting experience because you get to try a huge variety of different products in a small amount of time. And what I love about this particular event is that the breweries have their actual representatives, sometimes the brewers themselves there, who can really answer questions in depth about the beers. There's other events, I won't name them, that I've been to in upstate New York that have the beers from the breweries, but the people pouring the cups, doling them out, are just volunteers who don't know anything about what they're pouring into the cups. So you only get so much of the experience there. But it is through that event that I made connections with Dancing Grain, for example. And it's a really great way, and we're hoping to in the future maybe provide cacao nibs or cacao mass to breweries here in upstate New York.
Very cool. Well, New York is also a big cider apple growing region. I know you've talked about pairing with cider a little bit. I'd love to hear more about your pairing, but also before we started recording today, you mentioned that you see some similarities between growing apples and making cider and the chocolate side of things. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that.
One of the things that I find really interesting and inspiring about Diego's chocolate is the fact that it is a chocolate product that is made at origin, meaning it's made in the same country or same region at least, where its cacao beans are grown. Cacao, it has for many hundreds of years been a product that was exported from tropical countries, and then the value is always added elsewhere to make the final product. Diego's and many other companies, more and more every year, are making chocolate in the cacao belt, so to speak, of the world. Most of your fans probably know that the cacao tree only grows between 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So like making chocolate down where its cacao grows, the folks at Nine Pin Cider decided to add value to the apples, to the many different apple varieties that are grown here in upstate New York. And over time, they perfected some very, very delicious and extremely diverse cider selections. And so they use 100% New York grown apples. And I believe, like Diego's, all the other inclusions, for lack of a better phrase, non-apple ingredients, non-alcohol related ingredients are also grown here in New York. The other interesting correlation between apples and cacao is that they both have to be harvested by hand. And this, of course, has lots of implications for the supply chain and the ethics of the labor used to produce the final product.
Do you find with the amount of apples being harvested in New York, is there a lot of migrant or undocumented labor that is taking place to harvest those?
My understanding is that yes, there is a huge amount of migrant labor that is used to harvest the apples because they have to be harvested by hand. There is some early drone technology that exists for harvesting apples, but it's still in the research and development phase. There is definitely a lot of migrant labor. Some of it is not undocumented migrant labor. New York State was the third largest state after Washington and Oregon, I believe, in terms of bringing into the U.S. Temporary agricultural workers on, I believe it's the H-2B visa. Things may be changing nowadays, obviously, with that kind of stuff, but the workforce is a mix of documented and undocumented immigrants. Very few, if any, U.S. folks working, directly in the harvest lines.
Well, let's talk a little bit about pairing with cider. I'll confess this isn't something I've done a lot of, so I'm interested to hear from you what kind of things you've picked up in your experiments with doing that.
Pairing with apple cider has been an interesting journey. What I found is that what we end up combining in terms of flavors are the added ingredients, the inclusions. So Nine Pin Cider, for example, they use one or two varieties of apples, but there's not a huge difference in the flavor profile of those apples, at least with the ones that they use for like 80-90% of their products. They have some specialty ones. So what they do, similar to us at Diego's, is, find other interesting ingredients to mix in that will complement or bring out different flavors of the primary ingredient. So, for example, at Nine Pin Cider, they have a product that has ginger in it, and also a little bit of lime juice, and they call that the ginger mule, to play on like a Moscow Mule cocktail, but in an apple cider. And we found that drink worked really well with our basil chocolate.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, the lime, ginger, and basil just really, really kind of sang together. Gave you a very, very like a full experience from beginning to end.
It seems like the biggest outliers you'd have to keep in mind with cider would be tannins and acidity when it came to pairing. Do you see a lot of variance there in how that allows you to pair with chocolate?
I would imagine that if I had worked with more cider makers at this point, I might say yes, but no. Having done these events just with Nine Pin, we've done two pairings there. They make their cider in a way that I can't notice any strong tannins or anything that would make the chocolate pairings difficult with perhaps with a different cider maker.
Sure.
But not in this case. I could see why that would be a concern, though.
Well, do you have other things, other pairings with cider that you would like to experiment with, or a next idea of what you want to do there?
Yeah, I'm hoping to expand and try with some different cider makers who perhaps source different apple varieties that might give us more flavor combinations that we didn't have before. And I'm also interested. This wasn't your question exactly, but we have a few mead makers, people who produce honey wine. And I know that you can get a pretty interesting set of flavors with that. And I'm curious to see how that will
Yeah,
pair with chocolate.
I
So
could
perhaps
see
in a
that.
future episode.
I could see that working very well because there it's almost more the things you don't have to deal with. You're not dealing with bitterness, you're not dealing with astringency, so you can just operate on the level of flavor without having to worry about how those things are going to clash or pull out difficult aspects from the chocolate. I have not paired with mead, but that sounds promising, so I'd love to hear what you come up with from that.
I will let you know, David.
The last thing I always ask is about the story that a chocolate maker is telling with what they're doing. You've told us the backstory of Diego's and what led to where you are now. What is the story you think that Diego's is telling today and into the future?
The first thing I would say is that chocolate is an indigenous food. Chocolate. I always want people to remember, and Diego says this himself all the time. He said it to me. I remember our first meeting, that cacao is something that came from his ancestors, and it's a food that is meant to be consumed mindfully and in a way that there's a lot of people who take a spiritual angle to it, and I completely understand where that comes from. But even if you don't go that far, I do believe that there is something like intrinsically important about cacao as a foodstuff that connects us with the earth and with our history in a way that perhaps other foods do not. And Diego's chocolate is trying to share that with people by not adding highly processed ingredients. Like, Diego has always been very adamant about no white sugar in his chocolate, although obviously there's lots of amazing craft chocolate makers who use white sugar, but that's like his thing. He wants the panela, which is unrefined evaporated cane juice, the least processed form of sugar cane that one can use. So the point is, because to him cacao is a connection to the land and to ancestors. So I always try to remind people that, if nothing else, that chocolate is an indigenous food, native people's food. I would love for people to pay more attention to craft chocolate makers at Origin. There's a lot of special things going on down there. Diego's is just one of many, many other companies. And the more that I connect with those other companies myself and learn what they're doing, I really see that as like an interesting dovetailing aspect of the future of fine chocolate.
With Nico's thoughts there on the importance of origin and chocolate being made at or close to where the cacao is grown, that makes the discussion of New York farm breweries very appropriate. The New York Farm Brewery law, or the license that it granted, was put into effect at the beginning of 2013 to support New York State agriculture and to encourage growth in the craft beer and cider industries in the state. Here's the wording from the New York State Liquor Authority on how to define a New York farm brewery. A farm brewer may produce beer and or cider, has a 75,000 barrel limit on annual production, that is pretty big, and must use 60% New York State hops and 60% other New York State ingredients in its beer, and 100% New York State apples or pome fruits in its cider. Interestingly, a farm brewery in the state can also basically just gets a liquor license to be able to sell any other alcoholic beverage, including hard spirits, in their tap rooms and retail to go. A farm brewery need not be located on a farm, critically. So these are not breweries that are operating on farms necessarily, although they can be, but they have to be using New York State agriculture for at least 60% of their ingredients in the case of beer, or 100% of their apples or pome fruits in the case of cider. 9-Pin Cider that Nico mentioned and Dancing Grain Farm Brewery both fall under this license. 9-Pin uses 100% New York State apples. Dancing Grain is a really interesting one because beyond just satisfying the requirements of that license, they are an actual working farm brewery. So 90% of the ingredients that they use in their beer are grown on their second generation family farm, currently helmed by Rachel McDermott, who is the daughter and niece of the brothers who originally founded that farm. They say this on their website: "We are farmers first and see ourselves as shepherds of the fields. Keeping our soil healthy and fertile and our water fresh and clean is a priority for both our farm and the brewery." Now, throughout the history of American craft beer over the last few decades, the term farmhouse ale has had particular marketing connotations. Typically, farmhouse ale, if you see that on a menu or a can or label, that's going to be referring to a couple of different European styles: Belgian Saison, most commonly, French Bière de Garde, and then it can kind of broadly be referred to a range of wild mixed fermentation beers. There is no official style that is a farmhouse ale or farmhouse beer. It just has kind of colloquially been assigned to those styles. There is some history to why there's kind of this fanciful origin story to Belgian Saison in particular, that it was originally developed to be brewed on farms in Belgium and given to seasonal laborers, seasonal workers who would come in to harvest the fields. There is certainly some truth to that history, but it has been wildly exaggerated for marketing purposes. Most modern saisons and the styles that we call farmhouse beers are brewed on the same equipment that's brewing IPAs and porters and every other modern style. And every style of beer is an agricultural product that is dependent upon the work of farms and farmers and farm laborers. It's using grain, it's using hops, potentially other ingredients as well that are coming from farms. So a good beer is always an expression of good agriculture. Dancing Grain is brewing primarily modern American craft styles. The Sunrise Squeeze that Nico mentioned is a double IPA. That's about as modern an American style as you can get. They are brewing a beer that they refer to as a farmhouse ale that I believe is a saison, but it doesn't have to be one of those styles that we typically associate with farmhouse brewing in order to be a reflection of great farming, great agriculture. The golden stout that Nico referred to uses a blonde roast coffee from Kickstart Cafe. Blonde stouts or golden stouts, or sometimes they're called white stouts, are trying to replicate a little bit of the roasted flavor that we typically find in stouts from roasted grain using coffee, sometimes cacao, sometimes they'll have vanilla or lactose in them, and they'll try to recreate a little of that flavor, but it's this kind of contrast with visual expectation because it's not a dark beer. So kind of an interesting style. I'll be excited to hear how that pairing works out with the cardamom bar that Nico was talking about. The Wolf Hollow Campout Stout that he mentioned is a dry Irish stout, perfect for this time of year, just a week or two after St. Patrick's Day. Irish stout, interestingly, is the original stout style. It was the first style of beer to use black malt that was roasted in a drum roaster. Guinness in Ireland was the first brewery to adopt that technology and fundamentally changed the flavor of dark beers, and the Irish stout was born from that, and all of our modern stout styles proliferated from it. So kind of a fun piece of history there. Those of you who have listened all the way to the end, you can get a discount code for the Diego's Chocolate website. The code is BEAN2 Barstool. The 2 is the number 2. So all capital letters, BEAN, the number 2 Barstool. All one word, no spaces or dashes or anything else. BEAN2 Barstool. That'll get you 20% off everything in their shop. Go and check out their excellent chocolate. It is a unique sensory experience since, as Nico was describing, it is not typical bars that you're expecting. It comes in these rolls. It's a little bit different texture. And sometimes just small differences like that can help you approach and appreciate flavors and textures in a new way. You can find out more about Diego's and order all their chocolate at the link in the show notes. And you can also find links to the breweries we just discussed there as well. Thanks to Nico for coming on the show today, and for all of you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.